They tell us the modern world was built on reason, on science, on progress, but the truth is less flattering. The modern world was built on belief. Not belief in God, but belief in systems. And the moment belief learned how to charge interest, history changed forever. This story doesn't begin in a church, it begins in a ledger. In the late 1400s, Europe was drowning in paper. Contracts, charters, deeds, promises, documents that claimed ownership over land, labor, and futures not yet lived. Most people couldn't read them, but that didn't matter. Authority didn't come from understanding, it came from seals, signatures, and the quiet agreement that someone, somewhere, was keeping score. At the center of it all stood an institution that didn't swing swords or raise armies, yet outlived kings and dynasties alike. It owned land without farming it, collected revenue without producing anything, arbitrated disputes without lifting a finger. It sold certainty. Not heaven, not forgiveness, certainty. If you paid, the system worked in your favor. If you didn't, it worked against you. This institution understood something no empire before it had fully mastered. Fear is volatile, but trust compounds. Across Europe, villages handed over grain, silver, and labor in exchange for legitimacy. Births were recorded, marriages validated, deaths processed. Existence itself required approval. To live outside the system wasn't rebellion, it was erasure. But systems grow hungry. By the early 1500s, the machinery was enormous. Cathedrals rose like balance sheets carved in stone. Administrators replaced shepherds, rituals became transactions, and the language of faith slowly merged with the language of accounting. Debts were moral. Obedience was measurable. Salvation had a timetable. Then something unexpected happened. Not a revolution, a bottleneck. Money started moving faster than authority could follow it. Trade routes expanded, printing presses multiplied, urban merchants grew wealthy without noble blood or sacred titles. A new class emerged. People whose power came not from ancestry or blessing, but from liquidity. They didn't hate the old system, they just didn't need it, and that terrified those who controlled it, because belief only works when alternatives are invisible. The real crisis wasn't corruption, it was competition. Across northern towns, people began asking dangerous questions, not about God, but about governance. Why should distant administrators decide local matters? Why should wealth extracted in one place vanish into another? Why should belief require permission? These questions didn't explode all at once. They spread quietly, in workshops, in taverns, in margins of books passed hand to hand. And then one winter, a city council did something unthinkable. They audited the sacred. Not spiritually, financially. They tallied rents, fees, and exemptions, calculated land held idle, measured how much value left the region versus how much returned. What they found wasn't heresy, it was inefficiency. The city wasn't poor because its people lacked faith, it was poor because faith lacked accountability. The council didn't revolt, they renegotiated. They withheld payments, delayed transfers, requested documentation that never arrived, and when pressure came from above, they asked a simple question: what service are we paying for? No institution survives that question unchanged. Soon other cities followed, not united by ideology, but by spreadsheets. The language of rebellion wasn't scripture, it was arithmetic. Central authority responded the only way it knew how: condemnation. But condemnation works best when people still believe the system is eternal. This time it wasn't, because belief had already begun migrating, not toward atheism, but to something newer, quieter, and far more dangerous: probability. Merchants didn't pray for good harvests, they insured shipments. Investors didn't seek blessings, they diversified risk. Trust stopped being vertical, granted from above, and became horizontal,
negotiated between peers. Faith was no longer absolute, it was conditional, and conditional belief is lethal to monopolies. The breaking point didn't come from theology or violence, it came from default. A major ruler, burdened with war debts and administrative costs, missed a payment, then another. The institution that once forgave sins now demanded collateral. Land changed hands, titles were reassigned, sacred spaces became assets on a balance sheet. For the first time, belief was backed not by eternity, but by enforcement. That illusion shattered fast. Local authorities realized something revolutionary. If legitimacy could be repossessed, it was never divine to begin with. So they built replacements. National systems, civic rituals, state-backed promises, new languages of loyalty, new myths dressed not in robes but in flags. Where belief once flowed upward, it now circulated inward. Taxes replaced tithes, courts replaced confession, citizenship replaced salvation. And for a while, it felt like liberation. People worked harder, saved more, planned farther ahead. Discipline became virtue, delay became moral. The future turned into a project instead of a mystery. A new faith had arrived. It didn't ask you to kneel, it asked you to hustle. Success became proof of worth. Failure became suspicion. Poverty stopped being tragic and started being personal. The system no longer promised heaven after death, it promised comfort before it. And people believed. They believed so deeply that they built entire lives around numbers that didn't exist yet. Returns, pensions, projections. Time itself was monetized, the future mortgaged, hope securitized. But something was lost along the way. The old system demanded obedience through fear of damnation. The new one demanded obedience through fear of falling behind. Both worked. By the time anyone noticed the similarities, it was too late. Banks replaced altars, spreadsheets replaced scripture, confidence replaced grace. And just like before, the system expanded until it could no longer remember why it existed. Crises came. Bubbles burst, promises evaporated, but each time the response was the same: more belief. Trust the market, trust the plan, trust the experts. The language had changed, the structure hadn't. Because the real legacy of that turning point centuries ago was not freedom from belief, it was the realization that belief itself is infrastructure. Whoever controls it doesn't need to rule your body, they rule your expectations, and expectations are far more powerful. The story doesn't end with collapse or awakening. History rarely offers clean endings. It ends with a mirror. Because today, every swipe, every click, every agreement you accept without reading is an act of faith, not in God, but in systems built by people you'll never meet, optimizing outcomes you'll never see. We didn't abandon belief, we just renamed it. And the question that remains isn't whether belief is dangerous, it's whether we remember that belief, once turned into a machine, will always ask to be fed. If this story made you uncomfortable, good, that means it worked, because history doesn't repeat itself, it upgrades. And the most powerful empires no longer demand worship, they just ask for your trust. And trust, once given too freely, is the most expensive currency of all.